our signal that we're back online. Okay, good. Appreciate all the great Twitter action out there as well. We're getting a good following. Okay, so that was a fantastic start and did exactly what I was hoping, which was to paint this picture of what success looks like in the post-K-12 world. And I think that the panel made it clear, even though I kept trying to push on this idea that, hey, you know, all hope is not lost, even for kids that at 18 just enter the workforce. I think Ron Haskins said it quite clearly, that those kids are still screwed, right? That if they follow the success sequence, they can get above the poverty line, and that's certainly better than not following the success sequence, but they still have very limited opportunities. So we're going to talk about then what happens right before that time, which is, of course, high school. And I hope you are also convinced by that last panel that preparing students, only, okay, here we go again. We're going to have to find the audio guy. Let me try this one. Is this any better? All right. That preparing students only for an academic, kind of traditional academic path doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. That there are other pathways out there, and exciting pathways that are showing great results. And so if we're going to prepare students not just for academic college, but for these other post-secondary routes, what does that mean for what happens in high school? What kind of skills do we need to build in high school? If we also do need to worry, though, about personal responsibility issues, about the success sequence, about avoiding, for example, early childbearing, other poverty traps, what roles do high schools play in that? And then this difficult question, again, we heard about it in the higher ed world. What do we do for kids who show up or who are 18 and do not have the skills, or not anywhere nearly having the skills? Well, we have the same challenge for high schools. What do we do with ninth graders who show up at high school and don't have nearly the skills to do a rigorous college prep program, or a rigorous career tech program, or a rigorous youth apprenticeship? How do we help those kids get back on track? So in this panel, we're going to try to unpack all of those issues. So let me introduce our panel, and I'm going to not have their, here it is, thank you. Okay, good. So we're going to start with Peter Meyer, who is an adjunct fellow at Fordham. He has done lots of great things in his career, including way back when worked for Life magazine, right? And he is going to talk about the small schools of choice revolution, really, in New York City. Had some amazing studies come out just recently showing, finally, after all these years, very, very strong evidence that those small schools of choice in New York are getting amazing results. We're going to talk all about that. Then we've got Joanne Jacobs. You know her from her great blog, joannejacobs.com, also a former journalist. And she's going to tell us about college prep high schools for the poor, building on a book that she wrote several years ago. I think it was called Our School, right? Then we've got Robert Schwartz, professor emeritus at Harvard. And you know, Bob in many ways inspired a lot of my thinking on these issues, especially around the importance of career and technical education with Harvard's Pathways to Prosperity. Is that right? Pathways to Prosperity project and this great report that they launched now about 3 years ago. So we're continuing the work that you have started, Bob, trying to get folks focused on those topics. And then finally, we're going to hear from Mark Sternberg, the Director of Systemic K-12 Education Reform at the Walton Family Foundation. And Mark promises to speak a little bit slower than our last respondent, but pack in just as much information. Yes. All right. Let's see if we still haven't. Is this one working yet? Is this one working? Okay, that seems to be working. Good. All right, so let's get started. Again, 8 minutes each. That's it, Peter. I'm going to hold you to that. 8 minutes. We're going to start with Peter telling us about small schools of choice in New York City. Thank you.
Well, if I could speak as fast as Rayhan, this would be done in a minute and a half. But I've tried it, and I don't even know what I'm saying when I talk that fast. Mike left off. Part of my bio is that I used to be in a Catholic seminary where we grew up with people who thought poverty was a pretty good thing. It's great to be here, especially with Joanne Jacobs, probably the best education reporter in the country. I've been following for years, stealing from her whenever I can. Robert Schwartz, whose work I didn't know until I asked my local CTE guru what I should read to be au courant, and he sent me to Pathways to Prosperity, which I must say, in version 10 of my report, Pathways figured quite a bit, and by version 57, he was gone. Sorry. What to do with high school is a hugely important topic, and when Mike first proposed the idea of a chapter about whether we can take kids who enter high school unprepared for high school and graduate them college and career ready, I said, I know, I've got just the program. And I proceeded to talk about my small town in upstate New York with 2,000 K-12 students. 65% of them were free and reduced lunch, 30% were black, and we had graduation rates and dropout rates that were pretty sad. And Mike kind of grimaced, even though I wasn't with him, but I could hear him since I wrote, for 2 years, I wrote a blog for Fordham called Board's Eye View, because I spent a lot of time on 5 years on the Board of Education for this little district, and I must say, I've had crowds like this crowded into our gymnasium and our cafeteria, but it was mostly to talk about why we moved the practice field for baseball. What I started to tell Mike was that we had the secret. We figured out what the secret was at Hudson when we got an ex-Marine, some old beat-up trailers, put them 2 miles from campus, and a few good teachers, and we put the kids that were bad in high school and were not going to graduate there. And within 2 years, kids that were headed for dropout land were passing the Regents tests, which in New York still means something for graduation, and still makes the diploma that high school kids get in New York mean something. But these kids were passing the Regents test and graduating, and it was front page news in the little town. And the kids in the program were doing better than the kids that they had left the traditional school for. And because the program was set up to get rid of the ex-Marine principal and to get rid of the kids, and that no one expected that, by God, they would actually do better in this program, the program was killed within 3 years. The story didn't get into my piece, but it suggested something that has been unheard of in our little district and the nation, for that matter, and that is that so-called uneducable kids can be educated, even after they get to high school. We know the stats. For many of our urban high schools, 20 to 30% graduation rates. Some of them have the same dropout rates. And we know the consequences. Lives on the dole and trillions of dollars, according to a McKinsey report, in lost productivity to the nation. Lots of culprits. Poverty, of course, is one. Our K-12 education system is another. But one culprit, the big one in high school, is the huge comprehensive high school with thousands of students that had become the default high school model for much of the last 50 years. In fact, between 1950 and 2000, the percent of American high schools enrolling more than 1,000 students grew from 7 to 25% of the total. Bigger had become bigger, but it certainly wasn't better, especially for the poor and minorities in urban centers. There have been constant attempts over the years to fix this comprehensive school. Ted Sizer, Deborah Meyer in the 80s, the Annenberg Challenge Grant in the 90s, in which Walter Annenberg's foundation gave $500 million to 2,400 schools in 35 states, and much of it to create small high schools. But the needle didn't really move. And then another mogul, Bill Gates, through his Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, trying to make the most of the lessons of Sizer and Meyer and Annenberg, started funding the creation of small high schools in the year 2000. The foundation would eventually give $1 billion to the effort. Unfortunately, in the first 5 years of the initiative, according to Gates' own researchers, these schools really didn't work, except in New York City, the nation's largest public school district. And of course, it took me several months of research to get to that point, and I was a little bit disappointed because the last time I had written a story for, cover story for Education Next was on Bloomberg and Klein. It resulted in Diane Ravitch leaving the magazine, and the rest is history. So in come Mike Bloomberg and his chancellor, Joel Klein, the former antitrust lawyer. Klein embarked on an ambitious school reform program in 2002 using Gates money that included amazing downsizing of high schools. By 2010, they had closed 30 large comprehensive high schools with enrollments of 3,000 to 6,000 students, dropout factories with graduation rates in the 20 and 30% range. And they opened nearly 200 small high schools with 400 to 500 students. By 2010, the results were coming in. Several independent research organizations found out that these small high schools of choice were working. Here's how the New York Times summed it up in a recent editorial. The Bloomberg approach has been vindicated by an innovative multi-year study showing that the poor minority students who attend small specialized schools do better academically than students in a control group who attended traditional high schools. Among the startling results are these. Students at small high schools have a graduation rate of 71.6%, compared with 62.2% for their peers in larger schools. The small school students are also more likely to graduate in 4 years and go straight to college. The gains are especially impressive among young black men. 42.3% of them enroll in college, as opposed to 31% of their peers in the control group. Keep in mind that most of the students that we're talking about in high school are many of those students that Mike posed the question to earlier. What do you do with students who are on the path to non-education? We'll see. I will try to explain what happened very briefly. The first thing that New York City did differently was prioritize academics. It used a list of 10 characteristics of effective high schools developed by New Visions for Public Schools in New York, which had already opened several dozen small high schools. And number 1 on the list was a rigorous instructional program. Number 4 on the list was instructional leadership. Number 6, continuous assessment of student learning. There were other characteristics that sounded like Sizer and Gates: personalized relationships, clear focus and expectations, school-based professional development, etc. But the emphasis on instruction was clear and contrasted significantly with what the Gates researchers discovered about most of the other Gates programs. The second big difference in New York City was what Robert Hughes of New Visions called superintendency. He told me the story of his first meeting with Joel Klein at an opening day ceremony at a small South Bronx high school in September of 2002, just 2 months after Klein assumed the chancellorship reins. Can you create 200 more of these? Klein asked him. In fact, that's what Klein did, with Bloomberg's support, and that's what transformed a nice idea into systematic change for the largest school district in the United States. The third major characteristic of New York's success, please read the paper because there are many other ingredients in this stew, but it was to focus on school reform, not student reform. I once suggested to Michelle Cahill, one of Joel Klein's first hires after he became chancellor, and who was the leader of the successful high school turnaround project, "So I've heard you figured out how to fix these kids," I asked. Cahill gave me what I have come to recognize as an amazing talent, a laser-like look, followed by a haiku-like comment. "We don't fix kids, we fix schools," she said. But what they did was fix schools so that they were focused on students first. Not an easy task. Fourth, they mined the data. One of the first things Cahill did was hire the Parthenon Group research organization out of Boston to run the numbers, and they found that nearly half of all the incoming high schoolers were behind when they got to high school, and quickly became one of 140,000 New York City high schoolers between the ages of 16 and 21 who were overage and undercredited and on their way to dropping out. But they also found that many of these kids were actually close to being on track. And that's when they created the Multiple Pathways to Graduation program, which was, as Michelle Cahill said, these were multiple pathways to the same diploma, and that's very important, not alternate routes to a different diploma. In some, it was best summed up what New York did by Leah Hamilton, who helped in the establish the Multiple Pathways to Graduation office, told me, the design of the program is important, high standards for everyone are important, and investment from the system to make this kind of work a priority is important, and leadership at a high level is important. A tall order, but if New York can do it, anyone can. Thank you.
All right. Very good start. One thing I learned is that Michelle Cahill should definitely be on Twitter. So I think she has some very tweetable comments that she makes. Those haikus would do great on the stream. And now that she's leaving Carnegie, maybe she can do that. Boy, you're a tough crowd. I thought that was a great joke. I guess not. I'll keep working on them. You liked it. Mark laughed. Thanks. All right, appreciate that. That's what matters, because let's face it, he's the money guy. So anyway, no. He laughed again. So a little context here is to say that, that my original assignment to Peter was to ask this question about how do we help kids who come in way behind? And it came after I had written a piece in Slate, basically making this case that we shouldn't be telling all kids that they need to go to college, and that, in fact, we should be looking at high-quality career and technical education as one other route. And a lot of people came back to me and said, but Mike, don't you understand that if you're going to go into high-quality CTE, you've got to have the same kind of high skills that you need if you're going to go into a high-quality career prep program? And I said, well, okay, well then, but what about all those kids who don't have those skills? And that's what got us to this concept that Michelle talked about, and she wrote a blog post for us where she talked about recuperative education. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the question and answer. How do you help those ninth graders catch up as fast as possible? But importantly, in New York City, it was still catching up to the point where they can graduate and pass the Regents diploma. So that's interesting about that external accountability and how important that is. Part of what happened in New York City wasn't just that the schools were smaller, as Peter said. Lots of cities tried that. But they were also specialized and focused, some very much with the more traditional college prep feel, some that might have, you'd walk in and you'd say this feels more like career and technical education. To hear about some other great college prep schools, I think most of them small, from around the country, we have Joanne Jacobs. Joanne, take it away.
Thank you. Let's see. I'll get this at my height. Let me check my watch. Before I start on the college prep high schools, I'll say that until very recently, I was doing Community College Spotlight, a blog for the Hechinger Report. And I just want to endorse what was said earlier about the real tragedy of young people who are so poorly prepared with their reading, writing, and especially math skills that they can't take advantage of community college opportunities. They can't get an entry-level job. I think it's very hard for them to move up on the job because they're not getting the kind of jobs that really have a ladder. And unless you have an uncle in the roofing business who's going to hire you, it's very, very difficult for the hardworking but uneducated young person to make any kind of living in our society. And at the community college level, what you see a lot of is people who aim high and hit nothing. It's not that they come in with 8th grade skills and they say, oh, I want to be a doctor, which they do, and then they end up as a medical technician. They end up with nothing. And I know in Pathways to Prosperity, which is a report that I love and I think is wonderful, they talk about career counseling in middle school. it is very, very important for young people, and I think middle school is the time to think about what are their goals and their interests, and to understand the connection between school and their goals. High school matters a lot. Many high school students don't know that, and they are kind of drifting through, doing the minimum, often getting patted on the head, you know, oh, you poor little thing. And in the paper I wrote, I talked to Jeanette DeBella, the principal of Providence St. Mel, and she went on this, I won't say a rant, but, you know, said, okay, your mom's in jail, your grandma's sick, you know. We have a ticket out of poverty. You know, you want the ticket? Well, you're going to have to work pretty hard. But we have the ticket. I was asked to write about a district-run, a charter, and a private school that are focusing on college preparation for disadvantaged students. So I did Providence St. Mel, a formerly Catholic, now independent private school in Chicago that's 99% black. I saw one blonde kid in second grade. Pretty sure it was a teacher's kid. But it's on the west side of Chicago. Even the poorest parents have to pay $100 a month. And they absolutely, I would say unequivocally, screen out people who aren't willing to come up with that money. They said some people aren't paying it themselves, a foundation has come up with the money, but if you can't get it together to do that, your kid can't go there. They have a lot of trouble competing with charter schools, and because people say, well, hey, the charter is free, and they have a lot of trouble with parents saying that the workload is too hard. If you are behind, if you have a less than a C average, you stay after school every day for several hours in order to catch up, and parents say that's too hard. And they believe that it's essential. Their students are well prepared and they do well in college. They have to work very, very hard. They don't have an explicit curriculum on the work ethic because it's kind of inherent in what they do. I also looked at Downtown College Prep, a charter in San Jose that's 90+% Mexican American, typically from immigrant families. I think about 20% of the students are undocumented. And this is the school I wrote about in my book, Our School, still available online. Email me, I'll sell you an autographed copy. DCP deliberately recruits underachievers. Their view was, if you're doing well in school, well, keep doing what you're doing. But if you're not doing well, if nobody in your family has ever gone to college, and frankly, it's really nobody in your family has ever completed high school, and in many cases, nobody in your family has ever started high school. The parents from Mexico, and many of them, often have only an elementary education. And I talk in the paper about a girl whose parents left their village in Mexico because there was no school after 6th grade, and they wanted better for their kids and worked very hard. And she said, doing well in school is my paycheck to my parents. That's how I pay them back for their hard work. One of the lovely things about DCP is how unentitled the students are. They all believe that nobody's ever going to give you anything. Anything you get in life, you will work for and earn. They are very respectful of their parents. They know how hard their parents work. And they want a better life for themselves. One kid told me about his mother bicycled him to school, to elementary school, on the handlebars of her bike, dropped him off, went out to her janitorial job. And on the way home, he would walk home from school, and the other kids would stop off and buy candy at the store, but he never had a quarter to buy candy. And he said, when I grew up, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a good job, and my kids, and I said, they'll be able to buy candy? And he said, yeah, my kids will be buying candy at the store, which you might not think is a worthy goal, but that was his. The third school, the district school I did was Hidalgo High School on the Rio Grande, extremely poor town, a town where everybody speaks Spanish, but not everybody speaks English. And the superintendent decided not just to start an early college program when that was new and there was grant money, but to do it for everybody, not to make it a small program. He said, our high school's not that big, about 900 plus students. Let's introduce college for everybody. And a key there is that Texas says you need to pass a readiness test to take college classes. They basically walk the program down to kindergarten to prepare students. They also recognize that there's a few college classes you can take without being able to pass that test, like art, computer programming or computer science for some reason, and public speaking and something else. And so they do have a fallback for students who can't. I would say a key to this is that Downtown College Prep and Providence St. Mel are totally college prep. That is the goal, and they're quite small schools, and they focus on that goal. Hidalgo is a comprehensive high school, and about 20% of their students have decided their goal is vocational, and that's fine. You go to community college and you take vocational classes while you're in high school, and they're very, very supportive of that. They don't have the counseling that the smaller schools have, and a lot of their students don't go to college, but they are vastly more successful than I think they would be without the exposure to early college. And they do a lot of career counseling in middle school to get students to set a goal and to think about what their path is. And I think that's very important. In the paper, I write about some of the common elements of the school, creating a college-going culture, including the idea that it's okay to try something that's hard and fail, learn from your failure, and it's not a big deal. And I was talking to Jennifer Andaluz at Downtown College Prep recently, and she said, our kids are prepared for college. They know how to fail. And very few principals, or she's now the director, would say that. But her idea of preparation for college is knowing how to fail and pick yourself up and go on. They're very big on planning, as I say, walking it back and listening to feedback. And Downtown College Prep is the culture is if the feedback is bad, if the data is bad, you don't deny it, you don't waste any time and energy pretending that, oh, well, they're lifelong learners, It's like, I remember the principal saying, gee, we got our I think they had them take the PSAT. We got our PSAT scores, they're crap, Okay, what do we do about it? They have typically, well, Hidalgo can't have a longer day, but PSM has a very long day for the kids who are struggling. They use summer school extensively to get students caught up, to get students opportunities to take college classes. At Hidalgo, they have these kids from immigrant families going to University of Texas Pan American and taking classes with college students and doing quite well in those classes, and it transforms their expectations about their future. College is someplace I can be. Providence St. Mel raises money from donors to have summer enrichment experiences. They sent a girl to Oxford, life transforming. They sent another girl was at Brown. She's exchanging email with her old professor from Brown. She's applying to Brown. I think she's going to get into Brown. And she'll go there with the confidence that she knows how to handle that. They're very close to parents and part of the community. Typically small. They are aligned to college standards. They know what colleges need and expect. They work with college professors on helping the students be Prepared, and Hidalgo works very closely with college professors. DCP does as well. DCP monitors, I think a lot of the college prep charter schools do this. They follow their students through college. DCP has gone into this in big time. I mean, they have an academic, an alumni success center in the high school where alumni can come and study or job hunt. They not only help students with college problems, they help them with job hunting because they don't know anybody with professional jobs when they graduate. And they create that mutual support network that students may have supportive family members, but not families that could support them with college challenges, not families that can tell them, well, you got a bachelor's degree, but it was in sociology. How do you get a job? And by the way, you're not legal, so how do you work around that? You are family, and you are family pretty much forever. They've had students drop out of college, and 3 years later they come back to the high school and say, how do I get back in college? Let's make it happen. They have a social studies teacher at their middle school that, he took 10 years or 9 years to get through college, but he did, and now he's a teacher. And they increasingly start early because it's very, very difficult to start in 9th grade. DCP struggled with rigor. They spent years scaffolding to get students up to the true college level, and now they have a middle school, and it's like, yes. Let me finish with an old-fashioned quote from the poem Invictus on the grit issue. It says, I am the master of my fate. Remember that? I am the captain of my soul. And I think students, they absolutely need the academic preparation for college. It's not a either or, but they need to have the emotional strength, the grit, DCP calls it ganas, in order to be successful. College is hard even for middle-class kids. Even for middle-class kids who've been A and B students. And students need that toughness, but if they don't have the academics, you can have all the motivation in the world, and if you don't have the academics, it's just very, very difficult. So I will pass on the torch.
It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, my comments, I think, are going to cut across both the first panel and the second one. I'm Bob Schwartz. I want to begin with 4 sets of numbers that have, I think these have come up in different ways from different comments, but I want to try to pull them together. The first set have to do with attainment. We've over this last 20 years, I think we've done a really good job of convincing parents especially, and young people also, that they're going to need something beyond high school. When you survey high school seniors, 90% say they're going on to some form of higher education. In the fall following graduation, 70% now are enrolled in some kind of higher education, but at the end of the day, if you ask what proportion of 25-year-olds have a 4-year college degree, it's only about 32%. The good news is that's actually been increasing a bit. When I and my colleagues who worked on the Pathways report began looking at these numbers 4 or 5 years ago, it was 28, 29%, so it's creeping up. We still have a huge problem in that if you look by income, if your family is in the top quartile or quintile, you're 7 times more likely to complete a 4-year degree than those in the bottom quintile. And for me at least, we clearly need to be to highly prioritize changing those numbers. I think for me the top priority in a sense is trying to make sure that whatever we do, we get more and more kids, low-income kids and kids of color, through to a four-year degree. I don't disagree at all with the notion that for those kids especially, that's the best outcome, and I think there are things we can do to work on that. That said, if you ask, by the way, roughly another 10% of the age cohort of 25-year-olds have a two-year degree. Maybe another 12% have a one-year post-secondary certificate that has some value in the labor market. That gets you a little bit above 50%, which raises the big question, what's our strategy for the other nearly half of young people? Again, as somebody pointed out earlier, the success stories here, that is those with four-year degrees, for those under 25, Federal Reserve study from the Fed in New York pretty recently pointed out 44% of BA holders under 25 are underemployed, that is working in jobs that traditionally we didn't think of as requiring a four-year degree, another 8% unemployed. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with the kind of structural changes taking place in the economy, but I would argue a lot of it also has to do with the fact that we've behaved as if college itself is the destination. We've paid so little attention to careers and giving young people advice about careers, exposure to the world of careers, so that young people and their families can make more informed choices, even those who know from birth that they're heading off to a four-year college or university, that we just have a lot of people really struggling. Right around the time that our report came out, two sociologists released a book called Academically Adrift. I won't sort of go into the details of this, but basically this was a kind of confirming study that said an awful lot of young people are simply drifting into four-year colleges and universities without any real game plan, and consequently they're not learning very much, and it helps explain why so many of them are really struggling in this labor market. Those who complete, obviously, but also obviously those who fall by the wayside along the way. Second set of numbers, again, that I think Tamar in particular pointed us to, but very importantly. One of the reasons I think that parents especially have been pushing the college for all idea is that we've been hearing over this 20-year period, just as we've been raising standards in the schools, we've been hearing that the middle is disappearing from our economy. We are moving into a world in which there are only going to be two kinds of jobs: high-skill, high-wage jobs requiring at least a four-year degree, low-wage, low-skill jobs for everybody else. It's now pretty clear that maybe something like 30% of the jobs that economists are projecting over this decade are in this kind of middle skill category, requiring clearly some education beyond high school and a pretty strong foundation of math and science skills, particularly for the best of those jobs. Roughly half of the jobs in the STEM field are in this middle skills category. Good jobs paying good wages that we're simply not preparing young people for anywhere nearly well enough. The other set of numbers I want to talk about we've kind of glossed over, and I think are hugely threatening, and that is that the bottom has fallen out of the youth labor market. I don't think people fully appreciate that in 12 years since 2000, when the employment to population ratio for kids was roughly 45%. It's now 26%. It's almost been cut in half. The problem I have with Ron Haskins' success formula or success recipe is that the second part of the recipe, leaving high school and working full time, that sounds great on paper, but that's simply not the reality anymore. Class of in October of 2012. Black males who had graduated from high school and were looking for full-time work, only 5% found it. 5%. That's a problem, to put it mildly. Let me kind of move along here, but I think the big point here is obviously the young people who are in the worst trouble in our economy are those who don't even have a high school diploma. But if you have only a high school diploma, and you have no resume, that is no work experience, and particularly if you are poor and black or brown, you are at the back of the hiring queue at age 20 or 21 or 22, and you are highly unlikely to be able to move from the back of that queue in this economy. And that's a huge problem, both for the young people and for the larger society. I want to focus on the importance of work and work experience. I mean, what are the implications for us if, in fact, young people on there, if the traditional youth labor market has really disappeared? I mean, if I ask people in this room, let me ask, I mean, how many people at age 16 or 17 had some work experience, either in the summer or after school, found on your own, not through school? It's, virtually everybody over 40, I think. This is really, this is simply no longer the reality. And as you might guess, access to any form of work experience, paid or unpaid, is disproportionately skewed to those of us, to kids of professional and middle class families. You're 3 times as likely to work as a teenager if your family earns $150,000 or more than you are if your family earns $25,000 or less. So my point here is, if the schools and employers together can't figure out a strategy to get kids access to work and work experience while they're in school, it's going to be very, very hard for an awful lot of young people to otherwise get it. So what does this have to do with the theme of kind of careers and career pathways? Again, Tamar made a point earlier which I think is absolutely right, which is, I've had the opportunity over the last several years to spend time looking at some depth at vocational programs across Europe and Asia. One of the huge advantages that particularly European systems have is they make a division between lower secondary education, which typically ends at the end of grade 9, and upper secondary education. And at that point, the world divides. In the systems I most admire, Switzerland in particular, 70% of young people at the age of 16 complete their high school by moving into programs that combine learning at the workplace and aligned academic work over the next 3 or 4 years. They're paid while they're doing it. They're put in adult settings. The expectations are sort of more adults, typical of adult settings, but they also get a ton of coaching and support through that process. And the notion is, catch kids early, socialize them to work and what it means to work before the not so healthy effects of the peer culture have so settled in with adolescents that it's really hard to change those habits and patterns. We've got to get to kids, I would argue, by the age of 16 or so, if we're really going to make a dent in this problem. The problem, if you look at career education in the US in an international context, particularly at the secondary school level, I've taken part in a couple of OECD studies looking at the US in a kind of comparative frame against 16 or 17 other countries. And the proportion of kids in serious vocational education programs in the US is really infinitesimal compared to both the intensity and the duration of high-quality programs, especially in the so-called dual system countries where kids really are combining learning at the workplace and learning in academic settings. One of the things Mike asked my wife and me doing this paper to do was to give some examples of career-related programs that we thought met a kind of quality standard, and we offered up 5 different examples of 5 different types of schools or programs, ranging from the kind of full-time vocational, standalone vocational school to a really strong program sponsored by a company that takes place at a workplace entirely in rural Georgia. I'm glad I had a chance to follow Joanne and Peter, because I'm kind of agnostic about the form that career education needs to take, but I do think that in some ways, for comprehensive high schools, if we want to get to scale in this country, the 2 most promising strategies, if we could figure out how to combine their strengths, on the one side, early college high schools of the type that Joanne was describing in Hidalgo. As it happens, the organization that we released this Pathways to Prosperity report in 2011, and in 2012, because of the interest among states, we formed a network of states. There are now 11 states that we're working closely with, and the partner organization in this work that's really carrying the load is Jobs for the Future. Jobs for the Future happened to be the organization that the Gates Foundation, when it launched the early college high school movement 12 years ago, asked JFF to be the organization that kind of coordinated the work of the organizations that were actually sponsoring and developing schools. If you look at the national data, for me, the argument of all this chatter about college readiness and how do we define it and how do we predict it, I think the evidence is totally clear. The best predictor of college readiness is being able to complete college level work while you're in high school. And ideally for kids who don't come from college going families, completing that work on a college campus. Because again, as Joanne said, this isn't simply about academic preparation, there are also kind of cultural issues, and kids ought to, rather than being asked to kind of navigate that transition on their own, being able to do that while they're still in a kind of supportive cohort environment makes a ton of sense. And the evidence is, I think, pretty overpowering. And so the early college, one of the examples we used in our, in talking about models was an early college high school in North Carolina that's really focused on health careers and done in partnership with both a community college and a big medical center in the Raleigh area. Unfortunately, although a lot of the early college high schools have a STEM focus, not a lot of them really have a strong technical focus. And the bias of the work that we are doing in our network is to really design programs that start in high school but seamlessly connect to two-year post-secondary institutions so we can get kids through to a technical program with a certificate or a degree in a high-growth, high-demand occupation where they can be pretty confident that there are jobs out there to get them really launched. This is not to foreclose opportunities for kids to continue on if they choose into a four-year program, but we think that the huge kind of missing middle here is around programs that actually lead to the kind of skills and credentials that have value in the labor market in fields like information technology, healthcare, and advanced manufacturing. Just a last couple of points I want to make. This is obviously, the work that we're trying to do is, how do I put this? It's highly challenging because we're trying to cross secondary and post-secondary education and trying to cross the education system and the workforce system. In most states, these are siloed kinds of enterprises. Different financing, different governance structures, different political constituencies. We argue that you need to work on four things at once in order to sort of make any progress around building a kind of career pathway system that really does cross secondary and post-secondary in the ways that I was describing. The first issue, and again, it's one that has come up 2 or 3 times, at least this morning, we just need to figure out how do we provide early and sustained career advising and exposure opportunities, starting at least as early as the middle grades, but year after year, making sure that all kids and their families have a much, much better understanding of the world of careers, what the alignment is between a young person's strengths and interests and what kinds of opportunities are out there, and what the education and training pathways are leading to careers. So that if we're going to build a system in which kids and families are making choices, not the schools deciding which kids are going to which pathway, those choices have to be informed, and we just have to make sure that all kids get much, much more exposure to the world of careers. We've got to figure out, this is really, for me, it's kind of realigning the balance between the academic purposes of education and the career purposes of education. Second point, the second sort of, in our terminology, we talk about sort of levers here. The second one is we've got to figure out a strategy. This can't be done by educators alone. We just need a different strategy for really engaging employers. When you look at the strongest European systems, what you see is the employers are not waiting around for educators to come hat in hand and say, will you please help us? They are acting in their own self-interest. They collaborate by sector to address their future workforce needs. They understand that it makes much more sense for them to invest early rather than to sit back and wait and then complain about the absence of either soft skills or technical skills that young people show up with. And I just think that's a lesson which somehow we've got to figure out how to get American employers, this is countercultural in the world of our employers, which tend to be very worried about investing in skills that other people are then going to take advantage of. They don't have a strong tradition of working collaboratively by sector. They tend to have a very short time horizon when it comes to, they don't invest in training, period, at least of entry-level workers, maybe of managers, yes, but not of entry-level workers. Huge challenge. To deliver on providing access to work and work experience, internships, other forms of work-based learning, you need some kind of organizations at the community or regional level that can really play a kind of brokering role that employers trust, that can go back and forth between employers and schools and young people. And that, if you're going to get small and medium-sized employers to play in this game, that's the only way that's going to happen, is if there are organizations that have this capacity to do it. And again, this is a big challenge in most of our regions. We have a relative handful of organizations, at least that we've encountered, that really are appropriately staffed and have the kind of skills and trust of the employer community to do that work. We happen to have a model one in Boston called the Boston Private Industry Council, which is our local workforce investment board. And finally, although this work really plays out at the regional labor market level, without strong state leadership, both public sector and private sector, that's willing to address a lot of the problems that make this work difficult. One example would be, kind of who pays for dual enrollment. If you really buy the idea that we've got to figure out a strategy to get young people started on some form of post-secondary. By the way, both for political reasons, but also for substantive reasons, I think we have to definitively end the notion that one has to choose between preparing young people for careers and preparing young people for post-secondary. Our position is that everybody needs something beyond high school, and everybody needs to have some strong preparation for careers. I'll stop there because I'm sure I'm out of time.
Yes. And finally, to tell us a little bit about how to think about all this is Mark Sternberg. And I should say, I introduced Mark as now the director of Walton's education program, but I should also say that he was very active in New York City under Joel Klein and Mayor Bloomberg in this small schools movement, so he can speak from that personal experience as well.
Thanks, Mike. Good to be with everybody today. I am here in wearing my Walton hat, but I'm unfamiliar with quiet academic conversations about the small schools of choice movement in New York City. Usually, Peter, you talked about conversations in gyms about where practice would be held. I'm used to conversations in large auditoriums with people yelling things at me, where in my capacity as Deputy Chancellor I oversaw the small schools work in the mayor's third term. So forgive me if I'm a little uncomfortable here. I've asked Andy Smerek to, at any moment over the course of the morning, to stand up and throw something at me, just so I'm feeling comfortable. My last job in New York City was as Deputy Chancellor. My first job was as a teacher. My second job was as the founding principal of a small school on the Evander Childs campus, not far, Peter, from the George Washington campus that you wrote so eloquently about. And so this is personal for me, and I think should be personal for all of us for all the reasons that each of the speakers this morning has talked about and written about. I could just briefly describe my point of entry as a school leader. I had responded to the RFP that again Peter wrote about that Mayor Bloomberg and Joel Klein put out early in their first term, and was advised in late June 2003 that my school would be housed on the Evander Childs campus. So I walked onto campus my first day there, just a few days after being told that that's where my school would be. And it happened to be graduation day for Evander's class of 2003. Actually, it was class of 2004, forgive me. And I stood in the back of that auditorium with a few of the teachers and administrators that would be joining me to start the school, and counted 241 graduates of Evander Childs class of 2004. That would be the numerator. The denominator would be 1,300, 1,300 students in Evander Childs class of 2004 originally. So a 19% graduation rate, if I'm right, for one of the largest high schools in the greatest city in the world, no offense to Washington, D.C. And in 4 years, the Bronx Lab School that I started had quadrupled that graduation rate, serving the same students. And I don't tell you that story to brag on myself or my team, because it's frankly not a story that it was so unique to Bronx Lab. This happened with the other 5 schools on the Evander Childs campus, and it happened in not all 200 of the small schools in New York City, but it happened in the vast plurality. And I think there are some major lessons learned, both about the New York City story and about the Hidalgos and the other school models that have been written about by these fine people and by others who are studying this space. So let me jump from there to maybe some high-level takeaways across the papers and some lessons learned. One is it would be hard to overstate the complexity and depth of this problem. I mean, the unfortunate reality is that too many students across this country are wasting time in high school because there's a lack of purpose and vision for reasons that have been discussed and we probably should talk more about. So let's not, this is an important conversation, but the implications are real and the problem is deep and profound in the field. The second takeaway, I think, from this morning is that there is a blueprint. There's a blueprint in South Texas, there's a blueprint in urban San Jose, and there's a blueprint in the 5 boroughs in New York City. One of the great mysteries here, and I think we have some folks with us today who were at the Gates Foundation when some of this original philanthropy was made. I'm here with Walton, but my introduction to philanthropy, frankly, was as a recipient of a Gates grant to start one of these small schools in New York City. Some of the best philanthropy that I think has happened in decades to create incentives for educators to get out there and solve complex problems. And my takeaway here was that there's a blueprint, and I think my question is why a decade later this experiment has not been replicated successfully in other cities, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit, Mike, as we move forward. Of course, the clarity around the depth of the problem and the fact that there is a blueprint does not suggest an easy path to replicating the experiment and the work and to building on the success. I mentioned my experience with panel meetings, the Panel for Education Policy. Andy, I think this is your prompt. You're going to pass, I see. This work is hard, and we cannot understate the depth of the problem. We also cannot understate the ferocity of the politics involved in change management. And many of us in this room bear the scars of that. And I think also something, Mike, that merits some discussion as, when I conclude. Ultimately, I think the story and the takeaway from these papers and the folks we've heard from is one of hope. That these specific schools and the action taken in one city give us reason to be optimistic that there can be serious action, serious efforts to innovate and to make progress, and these things are possible. And let me just close by sharing some thoughts across the dimensions of actors involved in these stories that, again, maybe prompt some good discussion. One, so the 4 categories I'll cover are the school district. 1, 2, talent, so the people in the schools doing the work. 3, parents and families, and 4, I'll close with some thoughts about us, the people in this room. And there I'll hope to connect, Bob, to some of your commentary. The school district. This was a school district in New York, a story about a school district, a mayor and a chancellor who viewed their role not as maintainers of a system, a failed system, but as results-oriented actors who viewed the role of the school district, but frankly the role of government differently, and I think in a healthy manner, to hold schools accountable for outcomes, to make the data about school performance available and public, and to manage a system of choice that was healthy and robust. Their job was to authorize schools, to open new schools that offered the kind of unique programming with a career and college orientation that we've heard about this morning, a diverse supply. And here I think I'm always thrilled to have Michelle Cahill's name mentioned in a conversation, one of the true innovators and champions of quality schooling, and her concept of multiple pathways, I think is a brilliant one that bears discussion and replication. So that was the concept of government, to do those things and then, frankly, to get out of the way, which leads to a conversation about the talent involved in making these schools happen. At the core, in each of the stories that you've read about or heard about, and you should read about, these are papers worth reading, whether it's DCP in San Jose or Hidalgo in South Texas or South Brooklyn and Vonda's work in Red Hook, the core ingredient was a group of educators, largely a group of teachers who were close to the action, who brought to complex problems insight and novel ideas about how to solve those complex problems in the most simple way, which was by collecting other like-minded educators and having universally high expectations for how the school would perform and how students would be held accountable for their actions. That is the common theme. And the simple action, the catalytic action in San Jose and in New York City was the issuance of an RFP by government. And then, like I said, sort of empowering, pushing decision-making down, and getting out of the way. Third, parents and families. One of my favorite stories from my days as deputy chancellor is a retelling of a very, very simple thing we did in my first year, which was, I guess, year 9 of the mayor's 12 years. Those of you who know New York City know that there are, I don't know, Peter, how many high schools in New York City? 250 or so. And there's a directory that is the size of a phone book. Family, every 8th grader, every rising 8th grader chooses their school, right? They are not assigned to a school, they must choose. We could talk for an hour about that. And they are allowed to, encouraged to make up to, I think it is 12 choices, rank 12 schools based on criteria that are theirs to decide. And then there's an algorithm that the city manages that will place them in a school. In my first year as deputy chancellor, we did a very simple thing with that directory, and we added, which was to add performance data about the schools to which families would be applying to the directory. So in addition to giving you the address and the programmatic profile of the school, we simply said, here's the graduation rate of the school over the last 3 years, and here's the grade that the city has assigned to the school based on performance. And a very simple, rational thing happened. In the following round of applications, there was a 40% swing, a 40% increase of applications to schools with an 80% graduation rate or above, and a 40% decline in applications, commensurate 40% decline in applications to schools with a 60% or below graduation rate. Now the question is, why wasn't there a 99% swing? But we can leave that aside. The fact is that parents and families are rational actors, and when given access to real information about how schools perform, they will behave rationally. And I think one of the things we need to solve for is the dearth of this clear and present availability of information in high schools nationally. Finally, and let me close with this, sort of implications for the people in this room, philanthropists, policymakers, and gadflies alike. I think we, with irreverence and impatience, need to embrace what these 3 people have written about and embrace what's possible. Our job is to solve market failures. It is to create incentives for the good ideas written and talked about here to take hold in cities across the country. That is certainly the ethos of the Walton Family Foundation. That is, I am sure, informed the work of, I can tell you of the New York City administration that implemented small schools of choice, and I think the Gates Foundation that continues to do great work across the country. That, I think, is the work that we need to take by the horns and take seriously. And I think, again, there's reason for optimism in what we've heard this morning. Our job is to solve these complex problems and to do it one school at a time. So look forward to conversation.
Excellent. That was fantastic. We have caught up, which means that we are going to have time to get the audience in here with some questions, both in person and on Twitter. If you're doing it by Twitter, just send us a question to #UpwardMo. But let me start with a few of my own. Simple question. Should we kill the comprehensive high school, at least when it comes to in communities that have a lot of poor kids?
I don't know, is that for any?
That's for anybody who wants to take it. But let's see, I don't know if your mic is on.
Just to quote Michelle Cahill again, when we were talking about comprehensive high schools, she said her husband works very well. She said comprehensive high schools work in the suburbs. There's a lot of good things about comprehensive high schools, but they don't work in the urban environments.
Mark?
I think, what was the question? Should comprehensive,
Should we kill them? Should we kill off the comprehensive high school?
we should kill the bad ones. You know, and it's pretty straightforward. I think, you know, even in the Bronx, there's some very good ones. So let's be smart about it and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I can tell you that small is, nothing's easy. Small is easier. But I would say no. We should
Just the bad ones. Okay. Let's talk about one of the big issues around this, which is the T word, tracking, right? When we start to talk about let's create schools that maybe have a very specific orientation towards career preparation, and that's one set of schools. And over here we have another set of schools that are more focused on traditional college prep. Okay, and even if both of them are trying to focus on higher ed, the career one is focused on doing that through apprenticeships and maybe into community colleges. The traditional college prep, it's more a traditional 4-year college or community colleges into 4 years. That feels like tracking, right? How do we avoid the downsides of old-fashioned tracking? There was a time not long ago, probably still happens in some places today, where the system tracked kids into these different tracks based on their race or class. How do we avoid that while also saying that, you know, this notion of kids drifting through these large comprehensive high schools because we don't like tracking doesn't make a lot of sense either. Bob, what are your thoughts on this?
My favorite large urban district is Long Beach, California. It has something like 23,000 high school kids. They are in basically, I think 6 or 7 high schools, so these are big high schools. With one exception, the high schools are all organized into academies that combine strong academics with a strong career focus. Virtually all the kids have the option, if they choose, to, as they move through, to complete the requirements, the so-called A through G requirements for eligibility to 4-year institutions. But the school district has a very strong working relationship with with Long Beach Community College and actually with the CSU campus that happens to be in Long Beach as well. And I don't think you necessarily have to choose between an academic focus and a career focus. As I tried to argue earlier, if kids and families are given the basis for informed choice, then by the middle of high school, at least, I could argue, then you can start to branch. I do think, in particular, mathematics pathways need to be much more flexible in the upper high school years. I think the work that's going on both at the Carnegie Foundation in California and the Dana Center in Texas to build mathematics pathways, basically to address the community college remediation problem, that is to try to kill off college algebra as the gatekeeper that pushes so many kids into remediation and then leaves them in remedial purgatory. The courses that are being developed in these two places that are much more career focused, much more focused on quantitative reasoning and statistics and probability, that could easily become dual enrollment courses that kids could be taking in the last years of high school to get past the remediation problem. I think there are some ways to create some flexibility, particularly in the last 2 years of high school, without falling into the old kind of tracking paradigm.
All right, but let me push you on this a little bit, Bob, because I mean, it starts to sound confusing because on the one hand, earlier you were saying we simply do not have enough kids in this country following anything that would look like a career and technical education track or an apprenticeship track, right? That we still have the vast majority of kids going through what you might call general college prep. And other countries have many more kids going into these other tracks, and they seem to be doing better.
Yeah, but again, as I think there seemed to be strong agreement in the last panel that all kids are going to need a solid foundation of core academic skills, particularly in the math and science realm, if they're going to take advantage of the decent so-called middle skill jobs. So I don't think it makes sense to think about kind of separating kids into these two big buckets.
Can I chime in there? I was thinking that it's not really remedial purgatory, because I think if you spend enough time in purgatory, you get into heaven. And that's not true of remedial math
I can confirm that. Yes.
at the community college level.
He's a Catholic.
I think the tracking issue is a huge problem. Fear of tracking, I think, has led us to do some really stupid things that are not serving kids. There was a study by the National Center on Education and the Economy looking at community college students and how poorly prepared many of them are. And they looked at, and nobody really looks at career readiness. What does it mean? What do you need to be career ready? And they concluded that to get into a technical certificate program that would lead you to a good skilled job with a decent wage, that what students needed was really solid middle school math skills, which they did not have at all. They had never really understood late elementary and middle school math, and as a result, they were stumbling around, failing algebra again and again and again, but they didn't need algebra. That if you had the middle school math skills, you could go into a certificate program. You might need to learn more math skills, but it would be in the context of what you were studying and therefore would make sense to you, and you'd be highly motivated to learn it. It wouldn't be this sort of sadistic thing where we're making you jump through meaningless hoops to, that you don't understand why you need to do it. I felt that way about trigonometry, by the way. And I can tell you that I have never used trigonometry, which is good because I wouldn't be able to. So I think we need to really rethink math. I think there's a somewhat simplistic thing where they say, oh, well, they're the same skills. And, up through middle school, they're probably the same skills. But in high school, I think there is some divergence. And if we can persuade people that they are making choices, then I do think that they are not identical pathways. And politically, that's very hard to sell. It's much easier politically to say, oh, they're the same skills. But I'm afraid that we are going to lose the students who, are the weaker students, and we're not going to give them the motivation to do the work they need to do, to get into these middle skill jobs, which, as I say, I don't think they require identical skills as the people who are going to get a bachelor's degree, but they certainly require much higher skills than students are learning. Many students
and we
are
heard
learning
from
in
the
high
previous
school, much
panel
higher skills.
that, again, it can be very motivating for high school students to get to be working, in a real workplace, to be learning math in a more relevant way, that for a lot of kids that's very motivating, and yet we simply don't have the capacity, we don't have the spots. In a lot of our cities, there are very limited options. In Dayton, Ohio, again, our reference at Fordham, there is one great technical high school, career and technical education high school, the David Ponitz Center, doing fantastic things. By the way, it's a selective high school, and it starts in 9th grade. It's very interesting, and tons of kids want to go there, but there's just not enough space. And so most kids are going through big, comprehensive high schools, kind of drifting through the traditional curriculum that doesn't seem to have a whole lot of purpose. Mark?
The exact point I was going to make. I think the question of tracking is mythology. And I'd like to hear more, Bob, about Switzerland and your observations of what's happening over there. The data, the demand data in New York City suggest that would support your anecdote from Dayton. Kids want in these schools. The problem is a supply problem.
I visited a school in Dayton that is not at all selective. It's basically for kids who are high-risk kids or kids who've already dropped out and are returning, and is completely vocational. And students are very motivated. They love it because they see a goal that's meaningful to them, which is a skilled job. And one of the things they said that at the comprehensive high school there was a lot of violence between white and black students, and the white students are often from the hills of Appalachia, so their parents are very poorly educated, and they do very poorly in school. And they had some, minor race riots. And this vocational school was about 50% black, 50% white. No fighting, no issues. They said, well, first of all, they just tell them, we don't do that here. But they're on work teams together. And when you're building a house, it's sort of irrelevant, You're building the house and you're trying to solve work problems. And, it's transformative. I think what we do is, if you tell everybody to aspire to college and you don't tell them what they need to be doing to succeed in college, you're not doing them any favors. I think in a sense you're lying to them. And if you are from a poor family, you don't know unless someone tells you. It's like, where are the stepping stones, Yeah. And if we're honest with kids, I mean, the difficult part is that you might say, well, you're reading at the 4th grade level. That's not going to get you there. So you have to be able to say, okay, this is what you can be doing to get there, not just, well, okay, you're a loser, but it's tough.
Let's get at least one question in here. I'm so sorry we haven't had time for more. Let's go over here. And by the way, Andy, sweater vest Andy Smerick hasn't yet stood up and yelled anything at anyone. I think if he does, you got to take the sweater vest off first, Andy, if we're going to take that seriously. Okay, tell us who you are and ask your question briefly.
Bob Shea from the CUBO, the National Association of College and University Business Officers. You asked a question up front, should we kill the comprehensive high school? And then Mark, you said we should kill the bad ones. What's the definition? What's the demarcation line between a good one and a bad one, based on some of the discussions about you maybe defined that an adequate level of math preparation was middle school math. I heard a discussion earlier that apprentices need to have high order math skills. So an electrician needs to know Ohm's law, which would infer that he needs to know algebra. So where's that demarcation line?
So Mark, how do you define it?
Yeah, I mean, persistent longitudinal inability to move students, no matter how they arrive at your school, to authentic readiness for either college or successful entry to careers. And based on diverse data sets having to do with demand, student performance, however you want to measure it, and again, over time.
And it's important again to note that in New York City, you're aiming for those Regents diplomas. So, for all the focus on the sort of anti-testing backlash right now, it serves an important point, right? Is that in New York City, to make sure that diploma means something, that you get a Regents diploma, that means that you have built up some skills that are going to get you ready for the next step.
And those assessments are one very important, but one data set that we have used and that I think best practice argues should be used in making some tough decisions.
All right, let me ask.
And in many places, graduation rates are not linked to anything objective, and so I fear that when graduations rates go up, it's because they're giving diplomas to students who don't, have gone through credit recovery, which is mostly a huge scam, and they're not meaningful.
So let me ask one more question related to the success sequence. Peter, this might get into your seminary stuff here if you want.
Let's not go too far.
All right, don't go too far. So we talked in the other panel about the idea that as important as higher education is, and we all now see, yes, incredibly important, that there are these other poverty traps that many kids, particularly kids growing up in poverty, fall into, right? One of the most common is early childbearing, right? Incarceration, substance abuse, right? So I'm just curious that the high schools that you've studied or looked at or that you've worked in, Mark, I mean, is that a part of the conversation among educators there? Do you do anything explicitly to talk to the kids, you know, to try to do teenage pregnancy prevention programs or to talk about some of these other issues that, again, are beyond the academic and even beyond the career? Anybody? Mark, you want to start? Or Joanne?
RAND did a study years ago, I think it was in Los Angeles, and they said the greatest, most effective birth control for, and it was particularly for black girls, but it was for all girls, was realistic college plans. Girls with realistic college plans managed to not get pregnant either by deferring sex or by using effective birth control. And I think that one of the reasons for the falling teenage pregnancy rate is more effective birth control, but also I think it's college going, and that more girls, including girls from low-income families, have the college aspirations that lead them to say, you know, I'm going to make a plan, and it's not going to be getting pregnant at 16.
Yep. Mark, and then Peter?
Yeah, I think I would agree with Rand and with you, Joanne. And I would say that so to the specific question, of course you spend time developing advisory protocols and connect a teacher and adult in a school with small groups of students, and we had a very elaborate 4-year looping protocol that I think was very effective, and all the research suggested that's very important. You can do all those things, and if without high quality adults and educators who buy into the mission and vision of the school, it will mean nothing. Nor will you be able to create realistic pathways to success academically.
Both and. Okay, Peter, last word?
Well, since you mentioned seminary, I should say that the Catholic schools not only had poverty as a good thing, sacrifice and discipline in the interest of something larger, but they also believed in education. So it's a very interesting thing happened to Catholic schools in the early 70s, which is when a lot of people believe the big drift began in education in the United States with cafeteria style curriculum, et cetera. Catholics found out they couldn't afford such a comprehensive school type of curriculum and program, so they narrowed the curriculum. And I think most people would say the kids benefited from it. That's why Tony who wrote the book?
Bright.
Tony Bright's big book. I recommend it to anyone who wants to find out what works and has worked for poor kids trying to get an education. And just one final word on tracking. I am very afraid of tracking, in part because when you get out into the real world and you're asking and you're trying to decide who's making the decision on where Johnny should go or Mary should go, it's scary. And all you have to do is, I don't mean to hit too hard upon the Gates Foundation and the terrific things that they do, but read the research on what happened to the Gates small schools money, and you can see how easy it is for things to go wrong. And I think what we've had in the United States, for especially inner city minority kids, we've already had a tracking system. And that tracking system is basically, you're not educable, and you are. And I think we really have to start thinking about how to educate the kids. And I think the New York City Small Schools program is a real blueprint for that. And if we can figure that out, I think we solve a lot of other problems.
Please join me in thanking our panel for great comments.
So easy.
I'm glad that Peter mentioned cafeteria-style schools, a great segue into lunch.
Yeah.
We have a buffet-style lunch for you out in the hallway, I believe. Please go grab your lunch, come back in here. We are going to get started with our keynote address somewhere between 12:30 and 12:45, depending on how quickly the lunch thing goes. So do grab your lunch, come back in here, and we will reconvene shortly. Thank you.